The massive alien ship appeared at the edge of Earth's solar system, like a dark metal mountain floating in space. Its black hull was covered with weapons that could destroy entire planets. The ship was called the Eternal Dominion, and it belonged to the Hegemony, an empire that ruled over hundreds of worlds across the galaxy. Ambassador General Krelvax stood in the center of Earth's United Defense Council chamber. He was tall and thin, with gray skin that looked like old leather. 4 bright yellow eyes stared down at the human leaders who sat around the circular table. His mouth was full of sharp teeth that clicked when he spoke. "Humans of Earth," Krelvax said, his voice cold and mechanical through the translation device on his chest. "Your world is now part of the Hegemony. You will pay tribute to your new masters." The room was silent except for the soft humming of the translation machine. Every world leader present could feel the weight of those 4 alien eyes, studying them like insects under a microscope. "The tribute is simple," Krelvax continued, raising one long finger. "You will give us 10% of everything your factories make. Ships, weapons, computers, food, medicine, everything." He raised a second finger. "You will also give us 5% of your people to work as laborers on our worlds." A third finger went up. "And you will submit completely to Hegemony rule. No more human governments. No more human armies. Only Hegemony law." Behind the alien ambassador, a large holographic screen flickered to life. The images it showed made several human leaders gasp in horror. Burning planets spinning through space like giant torches. Cities turned to glass and ash. Entire continents stripped bare of all life. "These worlds refused our generous offer," Krelvax explained, his 4 eyes reflecting the light of the burning planets. "Their civilizations lasted for thousands of years. It took us 3 days to erase them completely." The hologram changed to show massive Hegemony war fleets moving between star systems like swarms of metal locusts. Millions of ships, each one larger than Earth's biggest cities, carrying weapons that could crack planets in half. "We have conquered 1,047 worlds," Krelvax said. "Some submitted peacefully and still exist today as productive members of our empire. Others chose to resist." The screen showed more burning worlds. Those who resist always make the same mistake. They think their courage and determination can overcome superior firepower. They are always wrong. President Martinez, of the Americas Union, leaned forward in her chair. "How long do we have to decide?" 30 days, Krelvax replied. "After that, we will assume you have chosen resistance, and we will respond accordingly." The alien ambassador turned toward the door, then paused. "I should mention that attempting to flee your solar system would also be considered resistance. Our ships are already positioned to intercept any vessels trying to escape." After Krelvax left the chamber, the human leaders sat in stunned silence. Finally, President Chen of the Asian Federation spoke up. "We have to comply. There's no choice." "He's right," agreed Prime Minister Johnson of the European Alliance. "We've seen what their weapons can do. Our entire military would last maybe an hour against one of their ships." Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. The math was simple and terrible. Earth had perhaps 10,000 military spacecraft. The Hegemony had shown them fleets containing millions of ships, each one more advanced than anything humans had ever built. But General Lee Hyun-woo of the Korean Strategic Command was not nodding. He sat quietly in his chair, his weathered face showing no emotion. Next to him, Admiral Park So-min of the Pacific Fleet also remained still, her dark eyes thoughtful. The 2 Korean officers had worked together for over 20 years. They had studied every major conflict in human history. They had analyzed the tactics of humanity's greatest warriors, from ancient samurai to modern special forces operators. They knew something about humans that the alien empire did not understand. Lee Hyun-woo caught Park So-min's eye across the table. Without speaking, they communicated in the way that old soldiers do, a slight nod. a raised eyebrow, a tiny smile that lasted for just a second. Perhaps we should consider all our options, Li Haiyanwu said quietly. President Martinez looked at him with surprise. General, you saw those ships. You saw what they did to those other worlds. Yes, Li Haiyanwu replied. I saw an empire that has always won through overwhelming force. They crush their enemies with superior numbers and better weapons. It's an effective strategy. Then you agree we should surrender? Asked Prime Minister Johnson. Li Haiyanwu was quiet for a long moment. I agree that we cannot defeat them in conventional warfare. But throughout human history, there have been times when conventional warfare was not an option. Admiral Park So-min leaned forward slightly. The hegemony has ruled for thousands of years. They have conquered over 1,000 worlds, but there is something they have never encountered before. What's that? President Chen asked. The two Korean officers exchanged another look. This time their smiles were not tiny or brief. Humans who specialize in making empires fall. Park So-min said softly. In the silence that followed, both officers were thinking about the same thing. Hidden in military bases around Earth were men and women whose job it was to do impossible things, people who could infiltrate any target, eliminate any threat, and disappear without a trace. Humanity's most dangerous predators. The hegemony wanted Earth's best as tribute. Perhaps it was time to give them exactly what they asked for. The human ship. Quiet professional moved slowly through space, toward the massive hegemony border station. The station was bigger than most cities, a metal fortress floating in the darkness between star systems. Hundreds of alien ships surrounded it like guards protecting a castle. Ambassador General Krelvac stood in the station's main docking bay, waiting for Earth's surrender. His 4 yellow eyes gleamed with satisfaction. In 30 years of conquest, no species had ever taken longer than the full month to submit. Humans, it seemed, were no different from all the others. Behind Krelvax stood a row of hegemony shock troops. These soldiers were massive creatures with thick gray skin and powerful muscles. They carried energy weapons that could burn through tank armor. Each one had fought in dozens of planetary invasions. They were the Empire's finest warriors. The airlock of the human ship opened with a soft hiss. Krelvax expected to see frightened diplomats carrying cases full of tribute payments and signed surrender documents. Instead, something stepped out that made the shock troops take an involuntary step backward. The man was not tall or particularly muscular. He wore a simple black uniform with no decorations or medals. His face was calm, almost peaceful, but there was something in his dark eyes that reminded the aliens of dangerous animals, the kind that stayed perfectly still before they attacked. I am Captain Kim Do-hyun, the man said quietly. His voice was translated instantly by the station's computers. I represent Earth's response to your demands. Behind him, more humans emerged from the ship. They moved like shadows, each step deliberate and silent. There were perhaps 50 of them in total, all carrying simple black bags. They looked like ordinary people, some young, some old, some men, some women, but they all shared the same quality as their captain, a stillness that spoke of lethal patience. One was a woman named Lee Minji, who looked like she could be someone's grandmother. She had gray hair and kind eyes, but the way she moved suggested she could kill with her bare hands. Another was a young man called Park Sung-ho, who appeared barely out of his teens. His baby face hid skills that had been honed in a dozen secret wars. There was Choi Hyun-soo, a middle-aged man with scars on his hands from handling explosives. Next to him walked Kim Yuna, a woman whose innocent smile masked expertise in poisons that could kill without leaving any trace. Behind them came others, Yoon Taemin, the sniper who had never missed a target. Han Bo-rem, the infiltration specialist who could disappear in broad daylight. Lee Jae-sung, the interrogation expert who could make anyone talk. Each of them had been recruited from the darkest corners of human military operations. Some had been Special Forces soldiers. Others had been intelligence operatives. A few had been mercenaries or assassins. All of them shared one thing in common. They were the people other soldiers called when the impossible needed to be done. Ambassador General Krelvax stared at the group of humans with confusion. Where are your leaders? Where are the tribute payments? The signed surrender documents? Captain Kim Du-Hyen's expression did not change. You demanded Earth's best, he said. Here we are. The alien ambassadors' eyes blinked in sequence. These are your tribute offerings. A handful of primitive warriors. Not warriors, Du-Hyen corrected gently. Specialists. One of the hegemony. Shock troops laughed, a sound like grinding metal. What can 50 primitives do against an empire that spans the galaxy? Du-Hyen looked directly at the soldier with those dark, calm eyes. Would you like a demonstration? The shock trooper reached for his energy weapon. Before his hand could. Close, around the grip, he found himself on the floor, his weapon dismantled into pieces. He had not seen the human move. Neither had any of the other aliens in the room. Li Minji, the grandmother-looking woman, was now holding the weapon's power. Cell. She examined it with professional interest. Interesting design, she said conversationally. The energy coupling is vulnerable to disruption at 3 specific points. She pressed something, and the power cell cracked in half. The other shock. Troops raised their weapons, but found that the humans had somehow spread throughout the docking bay, without anyone noticing. Each alien soldier discovered a human standing directly behind them, close enough to touch. Please, Du-Hyen said politely. There's no need for violence. We're here as tribute. Remember, Krelvax's translator crackled as he tried to speak. What? What exactly are you? We are what you asked for, Du-Hyen replied. Earth's finest examples of human capability. You wanted our best people, as tribute to your empire. He smiled slightly. We decided to send our most experienced problem solvers. The alien ambassador looked around the docking bay. His shock troops stood frozen, each with a human shadow who could kill them before they could blink. This is not what we meant by tribute, he said weakly. Perhaps you should have been more specific in your request, Du-Hyen suggested. For the next 2 days, the hegemony officials processed the humans through their standard tribute procedures. The 50 specialists were assigned to different sectors of the empire, distributed across dozens of worlds and space stations. The aliens cataloged them as primitive laborers and sent them to work in various facilities. The hegemony bureaucrats congratulated themselves on acquiring such unusual slaves. Humans, they decided, would make interesting curiosities in their empire. On the 3rd day, something unprecedented happened. Intelligence networks across 3 entire sectors of hegemony. Space went completely silent. Communication relays stopped functioning. Data centers crashed. Security systems failed, and 50 humans disappeared into the darkness between the stars, carrying with them detailed knowledge of every hegemony facility they had seen. The tribute had been delivered. Now the real work could begin. The 50 humans had been scattered across hegemony space like seeds in the wind. Each one was assigned to a different world or space station, catalogued as simple laborers who would spend their lives doing menial work for their alien masters. The hegemony bureaucrats filed their reports and forgot about the primitive tribute from Earth. They should have paid more attention. Choi Minho found himself assigned to maintenance duty on the orbital command station above Hegemony Prime, the Empire's capital world. The station was a massive ring of metal and crystal that controlled all military operations for the central sectors. It was supposed to be the most secure facility in known space. The alien engineers who built it had made one critical mistake. They designed the ventilation systems to accommodate their own physiology, large ducts for large bodies. They never considered that smaller creatures might use those same passages as highways through their most secret facilities. On his third day of work, Choi Minho disappeared during his lunch break. The security cameras showed him entering a maintenance closet. They never showed him leaving. By the time anyone noticed he was missing, he had already crawled through 17 miles of air ducts and accessed the station's primary computer core. The hegemony used quantum encryption that was supposed to be unbreakable. But Choi Minho had spent 20 years learning how to break things that weren't supposed to be broken. He planted a small device, no bigger than a grain of rice, inside the core processor. The device would lie dormant for weeks, learning the systems, patterns, and protocols. When it finally activated, it would turn the station's own security systems against itself. 3 sectors away, Yoon Ji-hai was having similar success with a different approach. She had been assigned to work in a supply depot that served the hegemony's Third Fleet. Massive cargo ships arrived daily, carrying everything from food to ammunition to replacement parts for warships. Yoon Ji-hai spent her days loading containers and cleaning storage areas. The alien supervisors saw her as just another primitive worker, barely worth watching. They didn't notice that she was carefully studying every supply route, every security procedure, every vulnerable point in their logistics network. The explosives she made were invisible to hegemony sensors, using common cleaning chemicals and materials from the depot itself. She created devices that looked like ordinary maintenance equipment. A floor cleaner here, a ventilation filter there, a cargo scanner in another location. When the devices activated simultaneously across the supply network, they didn't create spectacular explosions. Instead, they caused precise failures that looked like accidents. Critical components broke down at exactly the wrong moments. Navigation systems glitched during hyperspace jumps. Fuel supplies became contaminated with substances that destroyed engine components. The Third Fleet began experiencing equipment failures at 3 times the normal rate. Ships broke down in space. Cargo convoys went missing. Maintenance schedules became impossible to maintain. But perhaps the most devastating work was being done by Han Seok-jin, who had been assigned to a prison world called Kethmura. The planet housed millions of prisoners from dozens of different species, rebels and dissidents, who had opposed hegemony rule over the centuries. The aliens who ran the prison saw Han Seok-jin as just another prisoner worker. They didn't know that he had spent 30 years as an intelligence officer, specializing in psychological operations and social manipulation. They certainly didn't know that he spoke 17 languages and had studied the history of every major species in the galaxy. What Han Seok-jin discovered on Kethmura was a powder keg waiting to explode. The hegemony had made the mistake of putting natural enemies together in the same facilities. Ancient rivalries and forgotten grudges simmered just below the surface. All they needed was someone who knew which buttons to push. Han Seok-jin began with casual conversations. He would mention to a Veldan prisoner how the Kethri had been given better food rations. He would suggest to a Morgak that the Zillinari were receiving preferential treatment from the guards. He spread rumors and half-truths, each one designed to increase tension between different groups. But he also did something more sophisticated. He began teaching selected prisoners about human concepts of resistance and organization. He showed them how to create communication networks that the guards couldn't detect. He explained how small acts of sabotage could be coordinated to create maximum disruption. Within weeks, the prison world was experiencing riots, work stoppages, and equipment failures. The alien administrators increased security, but that only made things worse. The prisoners had learned to use the facility's own systems against itself. Similar patterns were emerging across all sectors of hegemony space where humans had been stationed. Admiral Vekfar, the Empire's supreme military commander, found himself facing reports that made no sense. Command stations were experiencing critical system failures that their own technicians couldn't explain. Supply lines were breaking down. due to a series of impossible coincidences. Prison worlds were erupting in coordinated uprisings led by prisoners who had never shown signs of organization before. "What are we dealing with?" demanded High Counselor Vexnera during an emergency session. Admiral Vekvar studied the reports spread across his desk. Attack patterns that followed no recognizable military doctrine. Sabotage operations that used techniques no known species had ever employed. Intelligence networks that seemed to know exactly where the Empire was most vulnerable. "We're not fighting an army," he said slowly. "We're fighting shadows who know exactly where to cut." The hegemony had ruled for thousands of years using the same basic strategy. Overwhelming force applied directly to enemy strongholds. Their military doctrine was based on large fleets engaging in massive battles. Their security systems were designed to stop conventional attacks by organized forces. They had never faced an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. The humans didn't attack their strengths. They found weaknesses the aliens didn't even know they had. They didn't engage in battle. They simply made it impossible for the hegemony's systems to function properly. It was like trying to fight a disease. Every time the Empire's immune system responded to one problem, 3 more would appear somewhere else, and always, at the center of each crisis, there was a human who had been dismissed as harmless primitive labor. The tribute Earth had sent was proving far more valuable than anyone had expected, just not in the way the hegemony had intended. The Kethri had been slaves for over 300 years. Their homeworld had been conquered so long ago that most of them had never known freedom. They worked in the hegemony's mining facilities, digging precious metals from deep underground, while alien overseers watched them with energy whips ready to strike. But something was changing in the minds of Kethri Prime. Park Jinwoo had been assigned to work in Mining Complex 7, a massive underground facility that housed 10,000 Kethri workers. The aliens saw him as just another primitive laborer, useful for heavy lifting and simple tasks. They didn't know that he had spent 25 years as a Marine colonel, specializing in asymmetric warfare and resistance operations. The Kethri were tall, thin beings with blue-gray skin and large, intelligent eyes. They had once been a proud warrior culture, but centuries of slavery had beaten the fight out of them. They kept their heads down, did their work, and tried not to attract attention from the guards. Park Jinwoo spent his first weeks observing and listening. He learned their language, studied their culture, and most importantly, identified the natural leaders among them. There was Velthor, an older Kethri, who still remembered stories of the old days. There was Mikara, a young female, who had organized secret schools for Kethri children. There was Thekman, a maintenance supervisor who knew every tunnel and passage in the complex. Late at night, when the alien guards retreated to their secure quarters, Park Jinwoo began teaching these leaders about things their people had forgotten. He showed them how to create communication networks using the mining equipment itself. He explained how to identify and exploit weaknesses in the facility's security systems. He taught them the most important lesson of all, how to think like guerrilla fighters instead of victims. "Your ancestors were warriors," he told them in their own language during a secret meeting in an abandoned tunnel. "The spirit is still there. You just need to remember how to use it." Within weeks, small acts of sabotage began occurring throughout Mining Complex 7. Excavation equipment would break down at crucial moments. Computer systems would experience mysterious glitches. Transport vehicles would suffer mechanical failures that delayed shipments. The alien administrators increased security, but that only made things worse. The Kethri had learned to use the facility's own protocols against itself. Every new security measure created new opportunities for disruption. 12 sectors away, Li Yujin was having similar success with the Velden, a species that had been enslaved for even longer than the Kethri. The Velden were small, quick creatures with natural camouflage abilities that made them perfect for infiltration work. They had been used as servants and messengers throughout the hegemony for centuries. Li Yujin discovered something that the aliens had never realized. The Velden servant network extended across dozens of worlds. They carried messages, cleaned facilities, and maintained equipment in the most sensitive locations throughout the Empire. They had access to everything, but they had never thought to use that access as a weapon. "You are already everywhere," Li Yujin explained to a gathering of Velden cell leaders in the basement of a government building on Hegemony Prime. "You clean the offices where they make their plans. You serve food at their military briefings. You maintain the computers that run their fleets. You don't need to fight them directly. You just need to coordinate." The result was unprecedented in Hegemony history. For the first time, uprisings began occurring simultaneously across multiple worlds. When security forces responded to a rebellion on one planet, 3 more would erupt elsewhere. When they tried to increase patrols in one sector, critical systems would fail in another. The humans had taught their alien students the most important principle of successful resistance. Timing and coordination were more powerful than any weapon. On the factory world of Morgan and a human named Kim Tae-ho organized the robotic assembly workers into a network of saboteurs. The aliens had never considered that their own automated systems could be turned against them. But Kim Tae-ho had spent 15 years as a cyber warfare specialist. He showed the local slaves how to introduce subtle errors into manufacturing, processes that would cause hegemony equipment to fail months later. Warships would suffer engine failures during critical battles. Personal weapons would jam at the worst possible moments. Communication equipment would experience cascading system crashes that left entire fleets operating blind. On the agricultural world of Zillaneth, former Special Forces operative Yunsu taught the farming slaves how to contaminate food supplies with substances that wouldn't kill, but would make hegemony soldiers sick during combat operations. She showed them how to use their knowledge of local ecosystems to create biological weapons from common plants and animals. The Empire's logistics network began breaking down as supply worlds stopped producing reliable goods. Food shortages appeared in military installations. Equipment shipments arrived containing defective components. Medical supplies were contaminated with substances that made alien soldiers weak and disoriented. But perhaps the most devastating development was happening in the hegemony's information networks. A former intelligence operative named Han Min-sik had been assigned to work in a data processing center on a communications hub world. He discovered that the Empire's entire command structure depended on a centralized information system that had never been designed to resist internal sabotage. Han Min-sik began introducing subtle errors into intelligence reports and military communications. Orders would be delayed, modified, or sent to the wrong recipients. Supply requests would be duplicated or canceled. Personnel transfers would route soldiers to incorrect locations. The result was chaos at every level of command. Fleets would arrive at battle zones to find no enemy present because their intelligence was 3 weeks old. Supply convoys would deliver winter gear to desert planets and cooling equipment to ice worlds. Military units would receive contradictory orders from multiple commanders, each believing their instructions were authentic. Admiral Vekfar found himself in his command center, staring at reports that described an empire falling apart from the inside. Rebellions were spreading faster than they could be suppressed. Critical systems were failing throughout the territory. Communication between military units had become unreliable. "How is this possible?" demanded High Counselor Vex. "We have ruled for millennia. Our systems have been tested by countless rebellions." Admiral Vekfar looked at the holographic display showing hegemony space. Entire sectors were marked in red, indicating active rebellions or system failures. "Because we've never faced teachers," he said quietly. "We've always fought rebels who had to figure out resistance on their own. These humans, they're not just fighting us. They're teaching others how to fight us." The tribute from Earth was multiplying itself across the galaxy, turning every slave into a potential saboteur and every servant into a spy. The empire that had seemed invincible was discovering that its greatest weakness had always been the same thing. They had never learned to fight an enemy that knew exactly how empires fall. The great chamber on Hegemony Prime was eerily quiet. 6 months ago, this same room had hosted the triumphant declaration of Earth's conquest. Now it felt like a tomb, with emergency lighting casting long shadows across empty seats where the High Council once sat in absolute power. Ambassador General Krelvac sat alone at one end of a simple metal table. His 4 yellow eyes, once bright with imperial confidence, now darted nervously around the room. His gray skin had taken on a sickly pallor, and his hands shook as he shuffled through the documents before him. Across from him sat Captain Kim Du-Hayan, as calm and composed as he had been on the day he first arrived as tribute. He wore the same simple black uniform, carried himself with the same quiet dignity. But now the alien understood what he was truly looking at. Not a primitive warrior, but the architect of an empire's destruction. The terms are simple, Du-Hayan said, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the vast chamber. Complete withdrawal of all hegemony forces from human space. Full recognition of Earth's sovereignty and independence. Krelvax nodded weakly, his claws scratching marks on the metal table. Agreed, he whispered. Reparations to all former client species, Du-Hayan continued. Your government will provide resources and assistance to help rebuild the world's your empire damaged over the centuries. The government barely exists, Krelvax replied, his translator crackling with static. Most of the core worlds are in rebellion. The High Council fled 3 days ago. I only have authority because no one else is left to give orders. Through the chamber's massive windows, they could see the evidence of the empire's collapse. Smoke rose from burning government buildings across the capital city. Alien species that had been slaves for generations now walked the streets as free beings, many carrying weapons they had taken from former masters. And finally, Du-Hayan said, permanent dissolution of the hegemony's military apparatus. No more conquest fleets. No more occupation forces. The empire ends here. Krelvac's S4 eyes focused on the human captain with something approaching curiosity. How? He asked. How did 50 primitives destroy something that lasted for thousands of years? Du-Hayan was quiet for a moment, considering the question. You made a fundamental error, he finally said. You assumed that military strength was about ships and weapons, but the greatest military force in any galaxy is knowledge. The alien ambassador looked confused. Every species you conquered, Du-Hayan explained. You broke their spirit, but kept them alive to work for you. You created a galaxy full of people who hated you, but had forgotten how to fight back. All they needed was teachers. Outside the windows, a group of former Kethri slaves marched past, carrying the banner of their newly independent homeworld. They moved in perfect formation, their steps synchronized like trained soldiers. Behind them came Velden rebels, their small forms practically invisible as they flowed through the streets like shadows. We didn't fight your empire, Du-Hayan continued. We taught your victims how to fight it themselves. Every human you took as tribute became a teacher, sharing knowledge that your species had never encountered. Krelvac signed another document with trembling claws. Insurgency tactics from your special forces. Psychological operations from your intelligence agencies. Sabotage techniques from your most secret military units. And organizational methods from our most successful revolutionaries, Du-Hayan added. Humans have been overthrowing empires for thousands of years. We know exactly how it's done. The reports scattered across the table told the story of systematic collapse. The Third Fleet had mutinied when their Morgak crews learned that their homeworld had declared independence. Mining operations throughout the empire had ceased when the workers simply walked away from their jobs. The hegemony's banking system had crashed when Velden accountants introduced subtle errors that compounded over time into massive system failures. Your empire was like a machine, Du Hyan said. Very powerful, very efficient, but designed to work in only one way. When we showed your victims how to introduce chaos into that machine, it couldn't adapt. Krelvax finished signing the last document and pushed the papers across the table. What happens now? He asked. Now you go home, Du Hyan replied. What's left of your people will need to learn how to live without an empire. I suggest you focus on rebuilding your own worlds, instead of conquering others. The alien ambassador stood slowly, his movements stiff and uncertain. And the humans? Will you build your own empire now? Du Hyan shook his head. Empires are fragile things. They always collapse eventually. We prefer more sustainable arrangements. As if to illustrate his point, voices could be heard from the streets below. Different species were working together to restore power to the city, sharing resources and expertise freely. Former slaves were teaching each other new skills. The galaxy was organizing itself into something that had never existed before, a confederation of free worlds that knew how to defend their freedom. The species your empire oppressed spent centuries learning to be victims, Du Hyan said as he gathered up the signed documents. In 6 months, we taught them to be victors instead. Krelvax walked toward the chamber's exit, then paused at the doorway. What should I tell other species we encounter? What warning should I give them about humans? Du Hyan considered the question seriously. Tell them that we are exactly what we appear to be. If they approach us as friends, they will find us friendly. If they approach us as enemies— He gestured toward the window, where smoke still rose from the ruins of an empire. They will discover why empires fall. The alien left without another word. Later that day, Du Hyan and the other 49 humans boarded their transport ship for the journey home. They left behind a galaxy that was finally learning to govern itself without masters or slaves. Earth's tribute had been delivered in full, and the galaxy would never be the same.